Hello, welcome to the Self-Learning Podcast by Dr. Sushma Singh. Let us start discussion on Unit 29 Theories of Modernization and Modernity. And our topic is Approaches to Modernity. Thus, as Tyler points out, there are at least two approaches for the comprehension of how modernity came into being. These are ways of comprehending what makes the existing society so very different from that which enveloped man before modernity arose. One method looks at the differences in the contemporary Western society and culture and medieval Europe as similar to the difference between the medieval Europe and the medieval India. So we can think about the analysis difference between the civilizations and their attendant culture. On the other hand, the situations can be looked at from the viewpoint of change involving the end of one type of traditional society and the coming into being of the modern societies. The latter perspective is more influential one, and it provides an analysis that gives a different perspective. The approach mentioned first is a cultural approach and the second and a cultural approach. In the cultural approach, there are many cultures which have in them language and cultural practices that help us to understand the self, the other psychological sets, religion, morality, and so on. These factors are specific to a culture and are often non-comparable. Keeping the above in view, a cultural theory of the modernity outlines first and then analyzes the transformation into the new culture. The present-day world can be seen as a culture with specific comprehension of the self and morality. Thus, this model of modernity can be seen and used analytically to contrast with the earlier aspects of civilization. On the other hand, the cultural theory describes the entire process in terms of some culture neutral analysis. This implies that the entire process is not analyzed in terms of culture that existed and then transformed into modernity. Rather, it is considered too general an approach that can be seen as the process any traditional society would undergo. Thus, a cultural theory conceives of modernity as the rise of reason in different ways, such as the growth of scientific consciousness, development of secular thought ways, instrumental rationality, fact-finding, and evolution. Modernity can also be explained and accounted for in socio-cultural terms and also intellectual shifts. Thus, transformation, social, cultural, individual, can be seen to arise from increased mobility, demographic changes, industrialization, and so on. In such cases, as mentioned above, modernity is conceived of as transformations which all cultures can go through and will undergo in due course of time. Such changes are not defined in terms of individualism, morality, good and evil. They are instead taking of cultures and civilization as a whole. Thus, any culture would be impacted by the increase in scientific consciousness, secularization of religion, and the growth of instrumental thinking. Modernity then In this approach, a theory issues from rationality, which is culture neutral. This is despite the fact that the theory can account for why modernity arose in one society rather than another, or why it arose in some societies first and other later. In fact, the theory does not lay down specific points or stages into modernity, but as something general that can take any particular culture as its input. So, this operation or transformation is not to be seen as a perspective about human values or shared meanings. In the case of social explanations, causality is assigned to developments like industrialization that do impact on values. Considering then the explanations in terms of rationality, this is thought to be the exercise of the general capacity, which was ripe for maturing and unfolding. Given specific conditions, people see scientific thinking as having a place in society. They will also see that instrumental rationality is beneficial. Again, religious beliefs are by no means universal or undisputed and require a leap of faith. Finally, facts and the values are separated. Now, these transformations are facilitated by the presence of certain values and understandings and are hindered by other types of cultural values if they happen to be the dominant ones. These transformations are defined by the whole social and cultural context existing at any point of time. We can see then that the dominant theories of the modernity over the last few centuries have been of the acultural type. Modernity also involves a shift in the individual and community perspective. This is because until the viewpoint changes, the society concerned cannot move from a pre-modern to modern and on to post-modernity. On the other hand, Weber paradoxically argues that the rationalization, an important aspect of modernity, is a steady process which has cultural general rather than cultural specific. Similarly, the process of pre-modern to modern in society was explained by Durkheim in terms of the transformation from mechanical to organized forms of social solidarity. This is also the aspect of tranquil concept of creeping democracy, in which there was a move towards greater sense and actualization of equality among the various strata of society. These are all different but at the same time related activities. Now let us conclude the unit. Given all these types, if explanations, Taylor still feels that the explanations and the analysis of modernity focusing on reason are the most accepted one. Explanations focusing on the social still tend to talk of reason transformations that are social. Thus, the factors of mobility and industrialization are felt to bring about intellectual and spiritual changes, since they tend to create new layers of conditioning which bypass the old layers. That is, they loosen old habits and beliefs, whether religion or the old morality, including individualism and the instrumental reason. There is, however, the question of negative theories of modernity which do not have the positive or beneficial view of modern developments and see society going into a decline with the onset and the maturing of modernity. Thus, rather than seeing modernity as having unleashed many capacities in different directions, negative theories see it as a dangerous development. These two are essentially acultural theories. Thus, modernity is characterized by the loss of perspective, an erasure of roots dependent on history or even God. Thus, the negative theories of modernity see it as a loss of the previous state of overall well-being. Let us conclude that the arrival of modernity and all its various facets have to be seen as a mixed blessing. On one side are the positive socially relevant areas and technological development. On the other are the problems associated with the arrival of and setting down of modernity. Here the negatively oriented theorists point out that modernity has its own problems created by a fast developing technology that has its impact on the overall life of the people. Thus, while modernity began in the 16th century at the time of the Enlightenment, it continued to develop until the beginning of the 20th century. In other words, modernity has its discontents as well. Let us briefly mention what are these. Firstly, we must realize that modernity does not have problems as we pointed out. The belief in development and progress, forward-looking attitude and the dependence on rationality and reason have also given rise to optimism that was betrayed by doubts raised by the post-traditional thought. However, we must note that modernity achieved a lot of social and structural changes. Thus, the routine behavior on day-to-day basis alters and changes as technology develops. This is because technological innovations and inventions since Enlightenment have altered the entire fabrics of the world, restricting itself to large, well-developed towns, cities, and metropolitans. It is capitalism which has basically been the power behind the inventions and innovations. The airplane and motor car have from an initial slow start become integral part of daily life and world over. Thus, time and space have conceptually receded, and nothing can be done in modern world with precise timing and adequate space. Thus, mechanical solidarity have given way to organic solidarity, to use the terms coined by Durkheim. Weber's concept of rationalization has pervaded the modern world and given rise to precise type of thinking. Further, urbanism saw large-scale migrations, discipline, secularity, alienation, anomic, and the iron keys of bureaucracy are all parts of the organic structure of bureaucratic organization in the modern world. Now let us wind up the session, and we have come to the end of the unit. Thank you very much for engaging yourself with the self-learning podcast.